it's Francis. This week, we're bringing you back to an event we did on stage in LA, Big City of Dreams. Have a listen. I'm Francis Lam, and this is the Splendid Table from APM. I honestly feel that dining in LA is to see the promise of America. This incredible place where people come with impossible dreams and infinite grit. You see their hard work, you see their creativity, the bounty of the Southern California land, and of course, the awesome mix of people and cultures that make up our country. We got to do a live show in LA a few weeks ago as part of our tour of shows in celebration of our 30th anniversary, and we're delighted to bring it to you today. For our first segment, our guests were Evan Kleiman and Gab Chabrán. Gab is the associate editor of food and culture at LAist and is constantly scouring the city in search of amazing foods and the stories of the people behind them. He was a James Beard Award finalist last year for this work. And Evan Kleiman Evan's a legend. A lauded chef and restaurateur, 6-time cookbook author, and the iconic host of LA's very own public radio show, Good Food, which also is turning 30 this year. Evan told me that before we got on stage, but said, we're just not bragging about it. Which is so funny to me because, the Splendid Table, we're the Midwesterners, so we're supposed to be the passive-aggressive ones. Anyway, JK, love you, Evan. Let's head to the stage with them.
Hi, Francis. Hello, everybody.
No stranger to the microphone.
No, I'm so grateful that you asked me to join you on this tour. So fun.
I'm so grateful you're here. I am also super excited to invite to the stage Gab Chabrán. So, Evan, let me start with you.
Okay.
Because
I'm the oldest.
You got it's a matter of seniority. Your own story of how you got into food is, if I'm getting it right, in some ways it started with a teenage trip to Europe, where you said for the first time in your life you saw adult men talking about something they wanted to eat. But I wanted to ask you, actually, fast forward some time from there. And there was a period here in LA where you started to see a transition from a youth where, going out to eat was going to drugstore counters, to there being like something that you could call a restaurant scene here. How did that change?
Well, restaurant-wise, we were still living, I think, in a post-war world until the 70s, maybe. Maybe the 60s somewhat, but it was bifurcated. So you had the very high-end, very clubby restaurants that were patronized by the wealthy and celebrities, old stalwart places. And then you had neighborhood restaurants, little diners. What started to happen is the middle started to fill in. The idea of like a bistro, something a little more casual, but with more considered food than your average neighborhood restaurant. And it happened within the context of a whole cultural shift. So those high-end restaurants were all carpeted. You wouldn't say an architect was involved at all. It was all a lot of interior decoration. Mm-hmm. And all of a sudden, it was like somebody opened the door and realized we were actually in Southern California. And they opened windows, and the sun came in, and it was a different kind of vibe. I mean, it became a California vibe. And in the late 70s, early 80s, you had, the huge people. Wolfgang comes on the scene, Michael's opens, and all of a sudden, the template for the high end changes. Art is really important. You have local artists, art on the walls. Outdoor dining becomes something that isn't an afterthought. It's this recognition of everything that California is, this really creative, open, freewheeling kind of place that then becomes married to this farm-to-table movement that one could say started in Northern California, but became something else down here.
What do you mean by that?
I think we had a bit more harder edge. It was less purist, less precious, maybe. I always think about music, too. Music and celebrity, because after all, we are a town built on fame. And so it's the first time, really, that chefs become stars. They become people you recognize rather than the guy in the big, tall hat. It was this huge transition away from a very kind of stodgy, intimidating way of dining to a more like, let it all hang out, let's all be stars together kind of situation. It was, the 80s was crazy in LA. Crazy time.
There's a lot unsaid in that sentence. Okay, let's talk about the 80s, because then you opened your restaurant.
Yeah,
Cafe
I opened in
Angeli.
'84, the first one, yeah.
So right in this period.
Yeah.
And you say, oh, let's all be stars together.
But it was also a time where young people who had had the opportunity to go to Europe, backpack, it was like something structural happened in the airline industry that allowed young people to go to Europe for the first time with a backpack, and you didn't have to have a lot of money. And a lot of us did that and traveled all over, and those of us who were interested in food and cooking wanted to come back and recreate what it is we made. So like Campanile, you had Mark Peel, you had Nancy Silverton, you had Mary Sue Milliken and Susan Vinegar. All of us were just exploring and sort of figuring out where we belonged and expressing something that wasn't in a canon handed down from a French brigade system, more or less. And women, it was like the first explosion of women in the kitchen. We were lucky. We were represented and we got attention. So we got a lot of support.
That's super interesting, because I think that as we look at the history of different restaurant scenes around the country, the story of LA is unique in a lot of ways. But one thing that really stands out to me is the prominence of women chefs and women restaurateurs in that moment where things really started to take off. Why do you think that is?
What I think about is, why were we brave enough to say to our parents, no, I don't want to finish my college education, or I'd rather go to cooking school. In my case, I got a college education, and I got a BA and a master's, and then I just wanted to cook. And my mother she used to sit at a table watching me cook and sob. I mean, just the tears would be coming.
This was before she had the food or after?
Touche. But I think there was more freedom, and women certainly took advantage of that. And it wasn't easy. I mean, getting money to open a restaurant for us was harder. And I think we tended to lean on friends and family maybe more than people that were able to go to an investment group or get money from a bank. But we were also tight. I mean, it was a community.
And the customers, I mean, the clientele.
Such great customers.
And you had great customers. I mean, at the end of the day, that's kind of what the story is, right?
Well, it's so funny because boomers are so reviled now, but it was a period. It was a period of time when the economy was in this mega expansion mode. There was money. People hadn't married yet. They didn't have kids yet. They were going out like every night of the week, and it was like music, restaurants, clubs. And repeat customers. I mean, we would have regulars that would dine out 3 nights a week. And, my place was very, very casual, but even, at the high end, you saw that. I mean, Wolfgang, there was nobody like Wolfgang Puck. I mean, he changed everything for everybody in LA.
That's interesting. Actually, can I tell you about my first time visiting LA as a food writer?
Sure.
As a food writer, but also really one of the first times I came as an adult. It was like 20 plus years ago, or something like that, around 20 years ago. And I had, heard of Spago, obviously, for so many decades, and I was like, I'm going to go check this place out. And I was so struck by the look of the restaurant.
Was it the one in Beverly Hills or the one on Sunset?
In Beverly Hills. And there was like this giant stained glass window with like grapevines and like a giant like garlic bulb, like larger than me, as if it was like tumbling out of the walls. And there were like these trapezoid cutouts in the walls that were like neon blue and neon red. And I remember sitting down and just being like, oh my God, this place is so stuck in the 80s. it's like unbelievably 80s. And I was like kind of like joking to myself, like, haha. And then I order, some iconic dishes, and I'm eating like the beet and goat cheese salad and the smoked salmon pizza. I'm like, oh my God, these are so 80s. And I take a bite, I'm like, this is time immemorial. Like, this is the greatest thing I've ever eaten. And in that moment, I realized, I had like a total revelation. And it's not that this restaurant was stuck in the 80s, but it's that in the 80s, the entire universe wanted to be like this restaurant.
And it didn't exist until then. It sprang up for the first time that way. And I mean, when I think of Spago, I think of when it was perched above Sunset in that very provisional space, and everybody was sitting on plastic chairs, and their audience was an audience that was used to being cosseted. Like, all the chairs would be upholstered. Like I said, you're on carpet. A lot of times the walls were upholstered. Everything was hushed. And then all of a sudden this restaurant comes out of nowhere with this really, when you look at Wolfgang during that period of time, you see how young he was. Yeah, and it's like my restaurant. What was I serving? Things that you would find in any Italian trattoria, insalata caprese, spaghetti aglio olio, but nobody else was doing that then. It was like a big deal. My food was so simple, and I was like, why are people standing in line, like waiting for this? It was very strange.
Yeah. But I mean, I think it's so important that this was happening in the city that you said is like the city that's built on fame. And again, my revelation, let's talk about my revelation. But my revelation was like, again, that idea that like, we as a country, and like by extension, like as a world, have like been so deeply influenced by this city, by that moment in this city in particular. Again, we're like the entire aesthetic of the 80s that I think of now, like I realize like it came from here. Like, it was actually a regional aesthetic that became an aesthetic of a period, and that's incredibly powerful.
And it was brave.
It was wild.
It was brave because, like, Barbara Lazaroff, Wolfgang's first wife, was the designer. She did all that, and she was a big, brassy, bold woman, and she just put it out there. Her design aesthetic was that. And, like, I had an architect design my restaurant who, decades later won a Pritzker Prize, but when I met him was just, a small design group. So it's like we were also physically creating spaces that were such a 180 from everything that came before.
That's Evan Kleiman, host of Good Food, and Gab Chabrán from LAist. More from the stage in Los Angeles in just a minute. I'm Francis Lam, and this is The Splendid Table from APM, American Public Media. I'm Francis Lam, and this is The Splendid Table, the show for curious cooks and eaters. We're bringing you an episode we taped in Los Angeles with LAist, on stage at the Arutani Theater in Little Tokyo. Let's get back to it with Evan Kleiman and Gab Chabrán.
Other ways where like our entire sort of dining culture as a country has been influenced by LA or Southern California, like avocados, which are, botanically native to South America, but functionally from Southern California. The Haas avocado was developed here, and that's like
La Habra Heights.
That's like the
Close to
that's the
Whittier.
universal avocado.
It's in Whittier. Well, next to Whittier.
Yeah.
Yeah, like there's like an actual birthplace of an avocado. There's like a particular
There's a
gentleman's
plaque, I believe.
backyard,
Yeah.
right?
And sushi. I mean, the story of sushi is just such a bizarre, strange story. It like was one guy who was asked to come over by a businessman in LA. One guy from Japan comes over and he sells everything. He sells the accoutrements of serving sushi, right? And bankrolls a restaurant, and it becomes like we were hungry for this. It just exploded. And then the 80s was the time of, Matsuhisa, Nobu.
And from there, the rest of the country was
and
like...
from there, the rest of the country.
And didn't the same thing kind of happen with Thai food too? I mean, I'm thinking about Hollywood in the 80s, and you guys were talking about the design aesthetic of that time, and as an extension, Thai immigrants would, come to the area to start cooking Thai food, right? I mean, that was one of the first places
Absolutely.
in the country.
Yeah. We were very lucky that immigration had opened up at that point, and we were the recipients of this great culinary largesse, and of course, Jonathan was everyone's guide. And so it was also this combination of the high end becoming a different thing, more bistros. I mean, it is really hard to overstate the influence of Jonathan in a pre-internet era when you couldn't just open an app to tell you where to go eat. This extraordinary writer with this amazing gift who was in his truck just driving everywhere and inviting us to leave our neighborhoods and experience LA from a different point of view.
So Jonathan, of course, is Jonathan Gold. Legendary food critic, I think, is the way that like most people would put it, but I think he was more than that. You know, it's a first name basis for you, first name basis for those in this room, for those listening to this show across the country. Probably 45% of them will know exactly who you're talking about, even without the last name. Interesting thing about Jonathan, or many interesting things about Jonathan, but one of them was that he was originally a music writer. Mm-hmm. And I'll turn to you, Gab, because you were originally a music writer before you turned to food.
Yeah. I wrote for a publication called LA Record, where I would do live reviews and also reviewed records too as well. And I didn't get paid. My payment was either getting into the show for free or getting, a download of the album. And that was perfectly fine with me. I was like, this makes total sense. I'm going to go ahead and invest, my entire weekend just because I got to go see a band that I liked. So
if you put the CD between two pieces of bread, that's a meal too. You can live on that.
There was a lot of CDs back in the day, There was a lot of CDs.
I'm so glad you asked about music because music was such an important part of the whole scene.
Definitely, yeah. And I was chatting with Bill Addison from the LA Times, and I overheard him talking to somebody else, and he was talking about how food and music are, kind of side by side with each other in that respect. And that really kind of informed my process. Making the transition to writing about food felt sort of synchronous in that respect.
What do you mean?
I mean, for me, my process when I think about food, basically it comes down to, it's all experiential, right? And to me, eating a good dish is simply like a symphonic experience, You're getting elements of a little bit of everything as far as that goes, And Alex and Elvia of Evil Cooks is a perfect example. They'll be out here in a little bit to talk about their experience, but they are a heavy metal taqueria, I mean, they can make that connection. And they pioneered the idea of being a roving group of chefs, like you would be a touring band or something like that, traveling all around, concert T-shirts, all of that kind of thing.
Yeah. Obviously, we've mentioned Jonathan. When I first moved to New York City, I remember, the only part of New York City I knew was Chinatown, because that's where my parents worked when I was a kid, and all of New York City was just Chinatown for me. So when I moved there, I was like, I actually don't know anything about this place.
Right.
And I was intimidated, and I just didn't know. It just seemed vast. And I remember reading The Village Voice, which was our alt weekly at the time. And Jonathan's sort of counterpart on our coast was Robert Sietsema, weirdly also a former music writer, who had turned into a restaurant critic, and his very similar mission to Jonathan in that he just really wanted to find all this food from all these different communities, all this vernacular food, this local people food. And I remember just reading his column week after week, and that's what sort of drew my map of New York City. I never heard of Elmhurst, Queens, but now I know there's a Thai restaurant in Elmhurst, Queens I want to try, so I'm going to get on the train and go there. And while I'm there, I'm walking around, and now I have a little bit of sightline into this neighborhood and this community. And bit by bit, that's how I drew New York City in my mind. So, Gab, you are obviously a Whittier booster. You're we got the avocado.
I'm contractually
we have a
obligated.
There.
Yeah.
And I was born there.
Yes, that's right. We were
are the
neighbors.
birthplace of Evan Kleiman.
Yeah.
So you're a lifelong resident, but you still had to learn the city in some way. So tell us how.
Right. Well, I'm going to draw it back to Whittier too, and Jonathan too, at the same time. So one of the more memorable reviews that Jonathan wrote in the LA Weekly was about a restaurant in Whittier, which is no longer there, called the Golden Triangle. And they specialized in Thai, Burmese, and Laotian food. It's one of my favorite reviews of his, the fact that he came to our town and really kind of saw what this wonderful restaurant was doing. And in the article, he mentioned MFK Fisher, who was also from Whittier. He mentioned Richard Nixon, who also was from Whittier. It was like he saw us in a way, and he contextualized us in that respect, never downplaying it or anything like that. we're 18 miles southeast of Los Angeles, on the border of LA and Orange County. So a lot of people, if you didn't grow up in the area, you don't really know it. But I think it was the fact that he took the time to go out there and talk about this beautiful restaurant that, I still have very fond memories going to as a child. So I like to think I try to embody some of that spirit when it comes to trying different places, going all over Los Angeles. And I'll tie it back to music. I'm a big vinyl collector. I worked in a record store in my early 20s, and that's when I kind of started collecting records. Essentially, what it is when you're traveling to the outer lands of Los Angeles and looking for all these great places to eat, it's a form of crate digging. You are looking for the deep cuts in that respect.
Such an awesome metaphor.
And your fingers might get a little dirty in the process from flipping through all the vinyl and all of that kind of stuff. But then you'll have these amazing dishes, and it'll all kind of click and make sense, and a perfect representation of what's going on at that exact time and the people who are preparing it, and most of the time, in many cases, are coming from immigrant backgrounds too.
Yeah. What are some other places that you have encountered in your work that make you feel like, God, I love living here?
Oh man, I mean, those taquitos that we had from Los Dorados yesterday. I mean, that was a great example, because they're doing something that's familiar, but they're also kind of paving their own way in that respect. I mean, I've been eating taquitos since I was a child, but here I can take the concept of the taquito, but then really experience it in this sort of, technicolor level. I think that's a lot of what people look for in food. They're looking for comfort, they're looking for familiar experiences, and the chefs and restaurateurs and cooks, the ones who can really kind of channel that and also kind of bring it to the next level, I think is really what it's all about.
Yeah. Los Dorados, the taquitos are unbelievable.
Yeah.
So good.
They're incredible. They're individually sauced with their own salsa, super crispy, crunchy, and like the chorizo y papas,
And
the
the papas,
potatoes.
so good.
Super smooth potatoes, little bits of chorizo, and this electric salsa verde on top. It was phenomenal.
And the bean and cheese as well too.
The bean and cheese was killer.
Yeah.
Anyway, all that said, I think our love of restaurants, our love of food people is infinite. As I've been here the last few days, as I've talked with people, talked with you, talked with others, it's pretty clear that it's also a difficult time in Los Angeles for many people, not least restaurants. The economy is shaky, a downturn in entertainment production, a lot of people with less money to spend. Obviously, the fires were incredibly devastating, still are. The rebuilding is going to be a very long road. It's a hard time, but I want to ask both of you, through your deep experience and traveling and constantly talking to people, and also through the arc of history, what do you see now that gives you hope, that makes you think it's going to be rough, but we're going to come out on the other side of this?
I mean, the response to the fire, I'm going to start crying. The response to the fires, the mutual aid, was unlike anything in my entire life of living in Los Angeles on display. The generosity, and I knew the minute that it was happening, what the chef's response would be. And that just shows us the best of how people can be. And I think the resilience and the generosity gives me hope.
I would second those remarks. You really got to see how the community of LA sort of came together, and the amount of restaurants that were just offering free meals. Even restaurants like Pasho Lee,
It wasn't performative at all. It was just pure generosity.
Exactly. And a few people started doing it, and then more businesses started doing it, and then bigger chain restaurants started doing it. It was also extremely heartwarming to see everybody, sort of come together like that. I don't think I've as in my adult life, ever experienced something along those lines.
And the reason I have so much hope out of that is a whole different type of community formed. You know, not just of people affected by the fire, but also within the industry, people who came together to work together to feed people. And those kind of links when you're like in the trenches, those are lasting. Yeah.
It's beautiful. Well, thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, Gab Chabrán, Evan Kleiman.
Gab Chabrán is Associate Editor of Food and Culture at LAist, and Evan Kleiman is the host of Good Food. LA is nothing if not full of buzzy restaurants. But at the end of the day, ask any restaurateur and they'll tell you the same thing. You can't survive on hype. You have to have regulars. You have to be part of a community. But what does that really mean? We wanted to talk with a few chef owners about that question. Uyên Lê, who makes delicious Vietnamese comfort food at her takeout Bay E. Keith Corbin, twice a James Beard Award nominee, is executive chef and co-owner of Alta Adams and best-selling author of the memoir California Soul. And Elvia and Alex Garcia are the chef owners of Evil Cooks, probably the first pop-up taqueria to be nominated for a James Beard Award. Let's get to the stage.
All right, well, thank you all for joining us. I have to note that Elvia and Alex are wearing cool clothes. But these are the cool clothes they cook in because they were literally selling food at Smorgasburg right before this. They're here to drop knowledge on you and then go back to keep selling food. And actually, let me start with you. You've always said that you're from the streets, that you belong to the streets.
Yes.
What do you mean by that?
Thank you for having us, first of all. Yes, I always say that we belong to the streets because I'm originally from Mexico, and I started selling donuts in Mexico when I was 5, so for me, being on the streets is something that made me feel free, made me feel back in my roots. And I always said it, like, if I always do anything, I'm going to do it on the streets. And we did it already for 7 years. We were a pop-up here in LA. We did a lot of concerts, events everywhere, and it was fun. But at one point, like, so many ideas that you cannot make when you're in a pop-up. You need an actual kitchen, you need equipment, and, you know, like, if you don't get those ideas out, you become crazy. So somehow you need a place to give birth to those ideas, and we end up in a restaurant last November.
2 blocks away from home. It's really nice.
The commute is unbeatable.
Yes.
But this is interesting, right? Because you love the idea of going to the people and how you meet people and how you connect with your customers in a different way. Tell us about that, and why is that so important to you?
I always used to think about my career like being like a clown, being like in a circus, and move around and go find those
Scary
people
clown?
to laugh about you. Yeah, scary clown, why not? So cooking for me was like that, going around LA and find who liked your food, and that was comfortable. That was like the best thing. But unfortunately, like, at some point you need to settle. We're getting old, to be honest. And carrying the things in our van, it gets hard. So at one point we're like, you know what? Let's just settle down. We're not gonna look for anything. If it comes, and we'll take it.
We didn't really search for it. It actually came to us.
Yeah, it was like a random call from another fellow vendor. He was like, I found this spot by your house. I'm like, where? We know everything here in El Sereno. And then he's like, no, like probably like 2 blocks away. Go check it out. I told her she's been.
I was like, no way.
Because
No.
she grew up there. She cannot leave El Sereno. And she's like, I know the spot. It's super small. And I'm like, just let's go and check it out. We went, we got in. I'm like, no, it's super small. It was just like a 6-seat in the counter, and that was it. And the lady told us, like, no, it's a patio in the back. We're like, oh my God, I didn't know about this. So we went to the back, and we're like, this is it. This is home.
Oh, that's great. so the nomads finally settled down. So you were cooking in different pop-ups. People would come to your house. You would vend at Smorgasburg. In all those years, every restaurant needs its regulars, right? In all those years, from you going out into the world and selling to people like where they were, did you find regulars? Are they coming to you now?
Most of our regulars come like 3 times a week, every week.
So basically, we start as a T-shirt company. I was a chef for a lot of restaurants before, and I got bored of the executive chef position. And I was like, you know what? Like, I needed to de-stress, so I started drawing and making shirts and go sell to my friends to their restaurants. And at one point, somebody asked, like, can you do like a private dinner for us? I'm like, you know what? Let's do it. So we did that transition, and we start traveling. Especially, we try to focus on rock concerts and all that kind of stuff to bring like that same vibe. But we find a lot of people who actually fall in love with the food. And until now, we have people from back then who owns all the shirts and who comes to eat like 2-3 times out of the week. We have customers who bring like different people every time that they come. So I think somehow the food is good. And
Yeah. So if y'all have never tried their food, you should. You should also get ready for it because it is maybe unlike anything you've ever seen. One of their signatures is an octopus al pastor. So, I don't know, like 35 octopi skewered on a trompo, spinning around, being roasted, and it's covered in this beautiful black recado negro, so like a black paste of burnt chilies. It's super delicious, but it's highly unusual. Also, one of your signatures is a flan taco, which, I mean, come on, that sounds amazing. But Elvia, you grew up in Nazareno, right?
Yes.
And amazing to have the restaurant in the neighborhood where you grew up, where you live. But you also know all the people there.
Yes.
And I think, sometimes how people kind of want things a certain way. Like, they're like, what are these people doing here with these like weird tacos? It's almost like that thing where it's easier maybe to reinvent yourself when you go far away from home. So let me ask you, how has it been serving your neighbors food that they don't necessarily quite understand yet?
We'll have people come in intimidated, and I'll be like, I'll buy you your taco. Because they'll be like, what's a weird thing we have? Our cheeseburger taco. They're like, oh, that's weird. I'm like, I'll buy you your first taco. And they'll take the offer, and then they'll buy more. And then they come back with friends. But it was something that
there are multiple business models that operate like that.
I don't know. I feel like it makes them feel welcomed. It makes them feel like, oh man, they really do care, like, for my service. But it was something that I always wanted to do, was bring something different to my community, and being able to, I feel like I've accomplished something. I checked something off.
I love that.
That's Chefs Alex and Elvia Garcia from Evil Cooks. We'll be back with Uyên Lê and Keith Corbin with more of our live show from the Aratani Theater in Los Angeles. I'm Francis Lamb, and this is The Splendid Table from APM. I'm Francis Lamb, and you're listening to The Splendid Table. We're coming to you from Los Angeles, a city with a world-class restaurant scene, but where the heart of its food is still in its many diverse communities. Let's get back to the stage at the Aratani Theater with Uyên Lê, Keith Corbin, and Alex and Elvia Garcia.
Keith, let me move to you for a moment. It's your turn. When we talked the other day, you said something that was really profound. You said to me, a community is built by the people who participate in it.
Absolutely.
And you said it's the customers who design my restaurant.
Yes.
Now, I want to talk about your food, because the food at Alta is often referred to as soul food. And when I came the other night, your collard greens were spectacular, the fried chicken was top-notch. But I think the dish that I actually want to eat again, like right
Bone
now.
marrow.
Well, that too. But actually, even weirder is the salad.
Oh.
Because, well, it's beautiful, beautiful lettuces and vegetables, but the dressing was made with beriberi,
Yes.
an Ethiopian spice blend.
Yes.
And you had a bone marrow special that was made with suya, which is a Nigerian spice blend, usually used on
Barbecue.
yeah, like grilled skewers, meat skewers in Nigeria. And so I want to ask you, how did you get inspired to look at African flavors for your food?
Do you see what color I am? You set yourself up. I'm sorry. No, I like to turn things on its head. Mm-hmm. And when it comes to soul food, right, I'm black. If I created a soul food, I don't care what it is, right? I'm not going to be defined or marginalized with just like collard greens, mac and cheese, and fried chicken. So just like the bone marrow dish, you know, my purveyor had some bone marrows that they were trying to get rid of and was giving me a good price. And, you know, as chefs or as cooks, you know, you take these things and it's your job to make it delicious. And I just wanted to do something different with it. And so I just looked up African bone marrow dish. And no, but it came back as a African bone marrow and pepper soup. Mm-hmm. And it's like, I ain't doing no bone marrow soup here. Like, I can't pull that off. Like, but I went deep into like the flavor profile and the spices that they use. And I'm like, oh, I've never played with that. That'd be interesting. So I imported some in. And so, you know, the pepper that's in Africa, it has this black pepper and allspice. And their nutmeg is more floral. And so those things took it in a different direction. Instead of using olive oil, I like ordered some palm oil and played with those flavors in. I got lucky. Excuse me. I got lucky. But I just like to just try to flip the dishes on their head and just have fun in the kitchen. One of the reasons that I got in the kitchen is because I was starting to feel like everybody was doing the same thing. And so me calling my food California soul food allowed me to deframe it and reframe it using the beautiful bounty that California has to offer, not just in produce, but in culture, in race, and people. And so I use ingredients that if my grandmother was alive, she would say, get that out of my kitchen.
Well,
What is that?
Okay, well, let me ask you.
What is that?
A similar question what I asked Elvia, which is like, you know, when you have customers come in, especially if like there's a label on your food, like it's being labeled as soul food. So people come in with a certain kind of expectation, and that kind of expectation also like people get protective, right? If it's food they associate with their memories, with their family.
But that memory, that thing that they're attached to says Southern soul food. You're walking into a restaurant that says California soul food. Leave the attachment at the door. Just come in and enjoy the food, right? Because even that Southern soul food was food created off of techniques and familiarity with new ingredients from West Africa.
Right.
Gumbo is not new in Louisiana, you know? Like, you have a Nigeria okra stew that's made out of okra. Like, these dishes or these techniques or these ideas didn't start in the South. And so why do I have to stop there? Why can't I continue that tradition and create food, soul food, from the ingredients that surround me? When I think about soul food, it is food created out of love with the intent to nourish, sustain, and carry you over a day, right? And so when this food was getting created, they were feeding each other to carry them over in the fields, right, to get through a day. I'm still sticking to that. I'm still creating soul food. It doesn't have to be the same food that's created in Louisiana if you tell me it's too much fat anyway.
Man, you are from California. But I love that. So you're sort of completing the circle, right? Because if Southern food is really, in large part, West African food.
Well, creators are from there, right? And so from their ideology, philosophy, their techniques, from what they knew, they just was presenting new ingredients. They didn't recreate the wheel, right? Like yams, stews, one-pot meals, using meat to flavor dishes. Like when you're in Africa, like the meat is a flavoring agent, right? Cooking with open fire. Like these things is not new. Yeah. They just did a new ingredient. So I'm just following that trend. I'm following the example.
Yeah.
No shade on the people that want to keep recreating Alabama, Louisiana, Mississippi, right? But California has beautiful produce, beautiful product, and beautiful influences. And like, I want to create food that represent that.
Yeah. You bring it all the way back around.
Yeah.
So, Uyên, I want to turn to you now.
Hello.
Hello. So, Uyên and I have actually known each other for almost 20 years.
Yep.
Before she was a chef, we met on the Gulf Coast of Mississippi in a town called Biloxi, about 6 months after Hurricane Katrina demolished the region. And we were both working in disaster relief and recovery. Uyên was a community organizer, also like super brilliant. I was like blown away by this young woman who was like just out of college, organizing this Vietnamese immigrant community and refugee community who worked in the seafood industry there. A lot of them were fishermen. And after you finished your time there, we kind of lost touch a little bit, but I heard that you had gone to grad school and went to MIT. I told you she was a real smarty. Next thing I know, like years and years and years later, I'm like listening to Evan's show, and I hear this familiar voice, and I'm like, who's that voice? And Evan, in her beautiful back announcer goes, that's Uyên Lê. And I was like, you gotta be kidding me. Why would you become a chef? You have the whole world in front of you. Why would you become a chef? So, why did you become a chef?
We mostly talked about food, even though
in our very few off hours.
In our off hours, we mostly talked about food, and it's just been a big part of my life. Being a refugee from Vietnam and growing up in Vietnam, I felt very close to the food and how the food brought communities together, and very much particularly to street food, which felt very inclusive, one, but the flavors were just always so bright, and I felt like, in some ways, that the Vietnamese food in America in restaurants were presenting one version or some versions of Vietnamese food, but I felt like there was so much out there in the diversity in the country itself that I wanted to share. And it was also important to me to present something different, both from a food perspective, but what is the responsibility of a community-based business, and how do we, sort of as the Southern California community, how do we embrace each other? And so when I got into my 30s, I was like, okay, all right, all these recipes have just been living rent-free in my head. I need to get them out. So that's what happened. Yeah. I gave up benefits. I gave up retirement benefits. I gave up health benefits. I went and worked for minimum wage, doubles. You have to be a good cook before you can be a good chef. I sincerely believe that. So.
Yeah. But so you did that.
Yeah.
But how does that previous career in social justice and community organizing, how has that influenced you today, like as a restaurateur, as a chef?
I opened the business with intention to serve like fresh, flavorful food made from the heart at affordable prices in our rent-controlled neighborhood, and also to pay people what I thought was livable wages, and I've continued to increase the wages over the last few years as the cost of living has increased, and pooled tips. And we try to recycle as much as we can, repurpose, compost, etc. And it's the idea of community as well, and it's the idea of running a kitchen that is accountable to the community, but could also be there like during the fires, that can step in immediately, and I can be the one to make that decision and be like, what? Is my staff safe? Am I safe? Can they get to work? Let's do free food. I was able to make that decision in about 15 minutes. And I think that because of where we're located in Silver Lake, there were fires that you could see coming from different sides, but we're relatively secure. And so it was just like there were people with some produce they needed to get rid of. There were some people who had referrals of friends that didn't have access to food. And there are also people in our community that were willing to bring food out to those areas, just volunteers in our community, because we've really gotten to know our neighbors, and they show up and be like, okay, I'll deliver to the fire stations, I'll go to this zone, so just get some food together. So it felt like we created a free economy overnight in Los Angeles in many ways. Not us, but the community of Los Angeles created a free economy, and we did it overnight. And I'm really proud of us for that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Obviously, you and I met in a disaster zone.
Yeah.
And there is not to romanticize it at all by any stretch. Obviously, this is a nightmare. But there's this, God, who wrote this book? Was it Rebecca Solnit, maybe? Rebecca Solnit, A Paradise Built in Hell. And I mean, the title of the book sort of says it all, like this idea that in these incredibly challenging and devastating moments, you can see people reconfigure the world around them. It's not just, oh, what am I doing? What's my work? What's my restaurant doing? But they're reconfiguring the world around them. And that gives opportunity for people to do something real for one another and something good for one another. So I don't want to be a downer, but there is, again, I don't know if you were able to hear backstage, but the last question I asked Evan and Gab about was the fact that we're here in celebration of you, of your work, and what you bring to us. But, we know it's a challenging time for restaurants. It's a challenging time for chefs and restaurateurs right now. It's never easy, but it's maybe especially challenging now for a lot of reasons. So let me go down the line and ask all of you, what keeps you energized right now, and what keeps you hopeful and looking forward to the future?
I think that having a community and having people come back multiple times a week, I've never eaten anywhere 3 times a week, week after week. And there are people who do this, at my restaurant as well. And it's such an honor for that. And then to see them kind of bring their family when they come in from out of town. I think there's a lot of joy I get as a chef that folks get to experience this food. And then when it's gone, you have to start again the next day. But in that moment, there's this moment where they're sharing food with somebody they love, and they get to have a conversation. And it's like my food, and I think there's a special joy to that makes so much of everything else worth it. And so I also encourage folks to go eat out instead of ordering delivery or something, which I think there's a time and a place for it, but I think through the pandemic, folks have gotten really adjusted to that. But I think there's a lot to be said about being out and being in the community and then sharing food and then kind of just being around other people that makes LA so amazing. And I really encourage people to do that.
Keith, what about you?
Well, for me, I just take it one day at a time, and I know restaurant is not gonna make me a millionaire. I do this out of love and passion. Restaurants for me is a place to restore people. And so what keeps me going is just to give you somewhere to come outside of home and work that can be stressful, right? To give you a place to come. If I close my doors, where else do you have to go? Yeah, there's other options, but I'm speaking in terms of restaurants.
Yeah, in
if
general,
we
yeah.
didn't exist, what else do you have? Just to get away and commune. And so that's what I do it for. I open the doors every day because you're looking for somewhere to get away from the world and just be in that third place. And I get up every day to give you that.
Love that. Elvia and Alex.
For me, family vacation. That's what keeps me going. And we have so many ideas that we want to bring out, so many dishes, so many recipes, and that is what keeps me going.
For me, what keeps me going is the fact that I just want to be happy. I remember that kid selling donuts in the street, always dreaming to do something, become someone. And finally, after so many years working for so many people and giving my ideas, I'm able to do my own thing and create my own demons in a plate somehow. And that's what keeps me going, happiness and the fact that I'm doing it with the love of my life.
Wow.
I can't say anything better than that. So let's call it a show. Thank you so much, Alex and Elvia Garcia. Keith Corbin, Uyên Lê, and thank you for coming.
Uyên Lê is the chef owner of Bayu. Keith Corbin is chef and partner at Alta Adams. And Alex and Elvia Garcia are the evil cooks. Well, that was our show from Los Angeles, produced with our friends at LAist. We had a blast. We hope you loved it. We'll talk to you again next week. Our show is made every week by technical producer Jennifer Lupke, producer Erica Romero, and managing producer Sally Swift. Jordan Turgeon is our digital producer this week, and Lauren Humphrey is our senior podcast production manager. And thanks to our friends at LAist, Rebecca Stumi, Tony Federico, Laura Dux, Colin Haskins, Lorena Nader, and Michael Leva. Thank you for tuning in. I'm Francis Lamb, and this is APM, American Public Media.